Hey guys, welcome to my very first review in a brand new series. This is going to be a series of longer reviews, which is why everything's looking a little bit more casual, and the setup is definitely subject to change over time. It will definitely be evolving as the series evolves. This is my review series of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga. I will be reviewing it starting from the very first chapter, Puzzle of the Gods, all the way through to the end of the Millennium World arc or the Lost Memories arc, depending on what you call it. And this is going to be a long series. I'll be doing these every 2 to 3 weeks, whenever I have time for them, and there are a lot of chapters to cover. Overall, this series will be focusing on differences between the manga and the anime, particularly the dubbed anime, because that's what I'm most familiar with, and overall just drawing attention to some of the absurdities of the world that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is set in. And there's a lot of them. If you guys are familiar with the anime but not with the manga, I hope you get a kick out of me drawing attention to some of the major differences. And if you aren't familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! At all, I hope you can get enjoyment out of me poking fun at some of the more absurd aspects of the series. With all of that said, let's move directly into Duel Number 1, Puzzle of the Gods. Now, if you are at all familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh!, this first page is probably the first big surprise for you. In my opinion, far too few fans are familiar with the manga, and therefore far too few Yu-Gi-Oh! Fans are familiar with the admittedly pretty subtle, yet still obvious amounts of evolution that Kazuki Takahashi's art underwent over the course of the series. You can see here that the characters, while still recognizable as themselves, are just different enough in terms of general detail that they look more like interpretations of the characters done by a different artist. In some ways, I actually preferred this early art style to the newer art style because the characters did look a little more varied. What isn't significantly different here, though, is how clean and deliberate Takahashi Sensei's lines are. I absolutely love his art style. It's beautiful, and I did base my own art style off of it to a degree. Moving right into the story, it starts out with Yugi, our diminutive protagonist. His hair is somehow even wilder looking than it will be later on in the series, staying in during break at school to play games at his desk alone. His name literally translates to game, so I guess that makes sense. You may also notice at this point that Yugi seems pretty submissive and self-deprecating, more so than he does in the start of the anime. That's because this actually takes place probably a few months before the anime actually begins, during the period that we would sometimes see flashbacks of during the Duelist Kingdom arc. The card game that is so associated with Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays won't even be introduced to the story for several more chapters, and won't even become important until the first major story arc. Right now it just focuses on different games, one every 2 or 3 chapters at the very most. We also see at this point that Yugi is picked on by 2 of the characters who will later become his friends. They think he needs to be more concerned with traditionally macho things that he just doesn't care about. He's the type of person who would prefer to turn his enemies into friends. Even after Jinochi and Honda, Joey Wheeler and Tristan Taylor in the English anime, take his prized puzzle box from him, he is still polite and respectful to them and he lets it go. This is in contrast to most shonen protagonists, and contrary to the common understanding of shonen heroes in general. And that's because while Yugi is the protagonist, he is not technically the hero of the story. We don't meet him until later. Yugi, who refuses to stand up for himself in any way that's meaningful to Jinochi and Honda, is rescued here by Anzu. That's Taya in the English anime. While they don't respect Yugi yet in any meaningful way, they do respect Anzu, and they know that she'll kick their asses, and so they get gone. We get a scene between Yugi and Anzu here, where we're told that they've known each other for a really long time, but we kind of get the sense that they don't know each other as well as they'd like to anymore. Yugi is grateful for Anzu's help here, which is another traditionally unmacho trait, and he tries to be respectful of her despite his dirty, sticky teenage mind. And Anzu seems genuinely interested in Yugi's puzzle box, which is at this point called something special. So Yugi explains to her that the puzzle was a gift from his grandfather, and that the story goes that whoever manages to solve the Millennium Puzzle held within the puzzle box will be granted a wish. Yugi doesn't reveal what his wish would be, but he does admit that he's never completed the puzzle. We also get our first variation here of an important repeated phrase that will appear in some form or another throughout most of the manga series, something that can be shown but can't be seen. This phrase is remarkably important in the manga, but sadly doesn't really make the journey west to the dubbed anime. I don't know if it was used in the Japanese version of the anime, since finding good subs are pretty difficult, but that really isn't what's important here. What is important here is that 4Kids is literally the devil. Oh, there's a really awkward Dragon Ball reference in here too, just pointing it out. I don't really have a joke for it or anything. We follow Jinochi and Honda very briefly now, and we see that they are aware that they're kind of bullyish to Yugi, but we also see here that they are far from the real menace in this school. This is Ushio, a hulk of a teenager who makes extra cash by extorting students using his position as a hall monitor. He's saving up for motorcycle riding dual cop school or something, and I guess his dream is so important to him that he'll do anything, including break the law. Either that or the character designers on Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds are weird people. It's probably that, actually. Anyway, Ushio overhears Jinochi and Honda talking about picking on Yugi, and then he shambles off back to Dr. Frankenstein's lab or wherever it is he comes from, while Jinochi reveals that he apparently used his Shadowcat powers or something to steal a piece of the Millennium Puzzle without ever actually reaching into the box. And because he hasn't had his heel-face turn pill yet today, he acts like a dick and throws the puzzle piece into the swimming pool in the quad. Yugi is, of course, completely unaware of this since he hasn't finished the puzzle yet, and as class is let out, Ushio appears from his hole under the bridge and offers to take care of Jinochi and Honda for Yugi. But, of course, Yugi refuses, claiming that he isn't bullied, and he kind of shrugs off the encounter and goes home, where he immediately begins to question his sanity after finding a cute girl waiting for him. It's Anzu again, and she invites herself in to get creeped on by Yugi's grandpa for a while. It's at this point that, through Yugi's grandpa, we learn a bit more about the Millennium Puzzle, including the fact that Yugi is only really hearing what he wants to hear in terms of the story. The actual translation of the writing on the puzzle box is that whoever solves the Millennium Puzzle will inherit a dark power, and that the people who found the puzzle all died talking about something called the Shadow Games. But Yugi is so good and saccharine that his blood tastes like sugar water, so he doesn't believe any of the bad parts of the legend, just the general magical status of the object. In fact, he stays up late that night working on the puzzle, but he ends up getting stuck in exactly the same place he always does. Needless to say, he's feeling pretty shitty the next morning, and things only go from bad to worse when he learns that Ushio single-handedly beat the shit out of Jinochi and Honda, and now expects Yugi to pay him protection money for it. He shows off how serious he is by roughing up Jinochi and Honda a bit more, but Yugi jumps in and shields them, calling them his friends. He gets his ass handed to him all but literally, but he does prove that he will stand up to others when it really matters. This is the moment when Jinochi gets who Yugi is as a person and starts to respect him. Ushio leaves, going home to have sex with this knife or something apparently, and Yugi goes home to try and scrounge up the 200,000 yen, or about $1,635, that Ushio demanded by the next day to avoid another beating. He doesn't, obviously, but he does suddenly find himself compulsively and almost automatically assembling the Millennium Puzzle as if another hand is guiding his. Obviously, he's shocked to discover the last piece missing, but his surprise doesn't last very long because even though fate apparently decided that it was time for him to complete the puzzle, Yugi earned what is coming next. He gets his wish, which was for friends who could count on him. He acted heroically and he earned Jinochi's friendship, so Jinochi returns the puzzle piece. And I want to point out here and now that this was not because of the puzzle in any but a very indirect way. Yugi credits the puzzle and the character who is introduced as the puzzle is completed for him having friends a lot throughout the course of the series. That's wrong. Yugi got his wish by being exactly the kind of person he is. He just gives others the credit because he's modest. Yugi's grandfather reveals at this point, to the audience but not to Yugi, that he always knew that Yugi was the one who was able to solve the Millennium Puzzle, or that he at the very least suspected it. And as Yugi puts the final piece into place, he changes. This is his Super Saiyan moment. But unlike the Super Saiyan in Dragon Ball, he doesn't just become some kind of perfect warrior. Yugi changes completely. He becomes an entirely different person. This other Yugi is a contrast to the Yugi we've gotten to know in virtually every way. He's even drawn differently, looking severe and intimidating. Yet he's still recognizable as Yugi. He called out Ushio, inviting him to the schoolyard that night, and he's brought with him twice the amount of money that Ushio demanded. He agrees to play a game for it, where Ushio is likely to go home with more than the 200,000 yen that he wanted. They will each take turns placing the stack of money on their own hand and stabbing it with Ushio's girlfriend, and they get to keep whatever sticks to the blade. If they stab too deep, they get cut. But if they don't stab deep enough, they don't get anything. But unbeknownst to Ushio, this is a shadow game. And while shadow games go through several evolutions and retcons over the course of the series, there are three fundamental things that never change about them at the basis level, as far as I can tell. Now, this is my own interpretation of the shadow games, so it may not be entirely accurate as you know it, but this is what we're going to be going by through the review series, so First of all, any game, even a game made up on the fly, can be turned into a shadow game by any person who has the powers of darkness. Second, a shadow game is in some way formed by the intentions of the people participating in it. They bring with them whatever is in their true heart, whatever is their true person, and that affects the shape of the game. And finally, the winner of a shadow game can impose a penalty game on the loser including anyone who cheats. A penalty game can be anything from a way to literally destroy the other person to simply a super realistic illusion. And this is how we know, despite what some people still say to this day, that the other Yugi is not evil. A shadow game brings out your true self, the true nature of your heart. And Yugi, unless I'm recalling correctly, is the only character with the powers of darkness whose shadow games are never lethal. He will kill and he will maim if it means protecting himself and others. But in the shadow games where his true self is revealed, he fights with illusions and nothing more. Ushio, though, is evil. He is so greedy that he values the lives of others less than he values money. So when he realizes that his hand has started stabbing deeper and deeper of its own accord, and that eventually he is going to cut himself, he tries to stab Yugi so that he can steal all the money. He's shown his true self, and he's cheated, losing the game. And the other Yugi punishes him by making him believe that worthless trash and leaves on the ground are money. This is the illusion of avarice. The original Yugi wakes up the next morning, completely unaware of what the other Yugi did the previous night, and he goes to school to find Jinochi is waiting for him, not to bully him, but to reveal that he wants to give Yugi what you can show, but you can't see. He even reveals what that is. It's friendship. I love this as an introductory chapter of Yu-Gi-Oh! It introduces us to everything that is quintessentially Yu-Gi-Oh! While still being an engaging and quickly paced story, littered with intriguing questions that we want the answers to. What are the powers of darkness? What are the exact limits of the shadow games? Who is the other Yugi? Is he Yugi's true self, sort of in the vein of the ancient understanding of the shadow as a person's true being? Or is he a different character altogether entirely? We also learn just enough about the characters to start to like them, but also just enough about the characters to want to learn more. And the stories build upon each other from here. It just gets bigger and bigger. And while there are some retcons down the line, none of the later chapters blatantly contradict this one. It's a real feat for a story that gets as overblown as this one does. And we are introduced to some of the absurdity of this world, which I just absolutely adore. Apparently the cops in this world only prosecute card game related crimes or something. I know it's a really silly thing to latch onto when Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a lot of other good aspects, but I just find the absurdity of the world building here to be fantastic. And things only get weirder from here as we move into duel number 2, Lying Eyes.